things, like, and just thought I could do everything.
Yep.
And my body's like, no, you're an old lady.
You too much.
Don't be doing that. So, yeah, I wish myself too far. But I was feeling sorry for myself, and now I have no reason to feel sorry for myself.
That's right.
I'm like, George, you're making us all look bad. Sorry?
Just Donna.
Just Donna, I think, yeah.
Did you say Rob is here?
Rob is here. He's here.
He didn't have any travel time.
He didn't have trouble.
Were you worried about me?
Go this way, Donna, please.
What happens if I go that?
Well, many things could happen. None of which we want to happen.
Okay. All right.
Step careful.
All right, we get started. Okay, welcome to the August meeting of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We only have 3 members tonight. Laura is out of town, Laura Lewis. So this is Cynthia Brock, who represents the 1st Ward, represent the 2nd Ward, and the chair of the committee. This is Donna Fleming, who represents the 3rd Ward. We do have a slight change to the agenda. We want to switch the order of the community choice aggregation and good cause eviction legislation discussion because I guess Luis might be here a little later than expected. Any other changes? We're good? Okay. So I do have 2 cards for public comment. If anybody else in the audience wants to speak, if you could fill out a card by the pillar right there and bring it up to the, I guess, Lisa, are you taking cards? And I'll call out the cards in the order that I received them. So the first one is Patrick Braga, and after Patrick is Teresa Altz.
This microphone on?
Yeah, you just have to push the button, I think, as long as the button is turned on.
Looks green, so.
Yep, if it's green, you're good.
Great. Good evening. My name is Patrick Braga. I'm a local urban planner and classical composer. In early May, I emailed Common Council about a strategy to make systemic local change for more affordable housing in Ithaca, but because I haven't heard back, I'd like to present this in person. Back when I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I joined a local advocacy group championing an 100% affordable housing overlay law, adopted by City Council in October 2020. This innovative law permits 4-story housing, rental or ownership citywide, so long as it is fully reserved for those making below median income. Like Cambridge, building new homes in Ithaca is tough. Our development approval system is exclusionary. Families who can afford to build their own houses don't have to go through nearly the same level of hurdles as groups who produce housing for low and moderate income families, even when they meet building and zoning rules. And this is frustrating because Ithaca has documented struggling to provide enough high-quality affordable housing since at least the 1980s, which is for longer than I have been alive. This difficulty comes in part because in Ithaca's local implementation of SEEKR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, housing projects of 15 or more units are categorized as a Type 1 action, meaning it is likely to have significant adverse impact on the environment. The state does not mandate this level of scrutiny below 200 units, but Ithaca's current ordinance places apartment projects in the same adverse impact category as heliports, hospitals, jails, incinerators, industry, and nuclear material storage. This is law in Ithaca. Why in the world does affordable housing require the same level of preliminary adverse impact review as nuclear materials in Ithaca? Expensive housing and longer commutes make it harder for low-income and low-wealth families to live up to aspirations like paying off debt, buying a home, starting a business, or investing in their children's education. Most families' largest budget item is housing, after all. But an alternative future is possible. Why shouldn't affordable housing that meets existing building and zoning codes receive automatic approvals? What if Ithaca permitted affordable housing by right citywide, like Cambridge does? Imagine how many of our local service workers would cut their commutes dramatically. In my memo to Common Council, I drafted a resolution to make that easy for you. I identified just 3 lines of the city code that, if amended, can make affordable housing by right a reality in Ithaca. and I'd like to submit my memo for the record. Affordable projects under the state limit of 200 units should be type 2 actions, low adverse impact. And for site plan review, they can be expedited by being added to the list of projects of limited scope. That's all it takes. Affordable housing by right is a possibility, and there's an easy way to make it happen. Question is, does Ithaca truly want to lead? Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Where can I submit my statement?
Sure, yeah, you can bring it up. We could, or give it to Lisa, I guess. Thanks, Lisa, for
Kitchen in.
pitching in. After Patrick is Teresa Alt, and after Teresa is Genevieve Rain. Thanks.
Teresa Alt, 206 Eddy Street, College Town. Right to renew legislation is before you. Don't just talk about it. That's a cop-out. Amend it if necessary and take a vote to send it on for circulation. It seems that time and again, something that could really help moderate and low-income renters comes to this body and gets sidetracked. Inclusionary zoning years ago. Auxiliary dwelling units to increase the number of available housing units more recently. Okay, PEDC passed that one after forever debating it, and then the full council sent it back for more scrutiny. And I don't think it has come to the light of day since. Opting into rent stabilization for older apartments was sidetracked just last May, June. And meanwhile, you spend hours on art in the parks and historic preservation and a conference center and more hotels, all to bring more low-paying jobs to this community where the people who take those jobs can't afford to live. So the people who work those jobs, which often have very irregular hours, not good for buses, have to commute from the rural areas and neighboring counties in their old gas guzzlers. And we end up polluting the atmosphere and subsidizing a lot of parking, using up still more land where people could live if we made housing available to people who don't need and can't afford cars. This time, do the right thing. Bring right to renew to a vote and circulate it.
Thanks. After Teresa is Genevieve Rand, and after Genevieve is Katie Sims.
Does this sound okay? All right. So I'm also here to talk about the right to renew, good cause stuff, and just as a short pitch for why we need this law and why it's an important thing to pass to catch up to other municipalities and other states in the country is that right now there are three major reasons that somebody can be evicted from their apartment. The first one is non-payment of rent. The second one is objectionable tenancy, which means like you're damaging the property, you're assaulting or harassing your neighbors, things like that. And then the third one is no reason at all. The goal here is to eliminate that no reason at all so that somebody is only being evicted for a legitimate legal reason under state law. That's what we're trying to do by regulating the non-renewal process and making sure that tenants have a right to a lease renewal, provided that they're not in a non-payment or objectionable tenancy situation. What you'll probably hear from a lot of real estate interests during this process is that this law is going to make it impossible to evict people who are horror story tenants. And while I could talk about how I feel about making that the focus of the legislative process, I want to note that that's not the case. Objectionable tenancy, we don't even have the power to not make that a valid reason for eviction. And so, moving on to specifics, what's important to tenants in this city, and was a major theme that emerged from the Tenants Assembly that the Tenants Union held out here recently, is that a sticking point that I know, Seth, you and I have disagreed on this, is about making building sale or redevelopment a good cause to evict somebody. And the reason that people aren't okay with that is because the major sort of arm by which gentrification happens here is that housing that is run down and that is low cost and so on and so forth is slated for being knocked down and redeveloped. And then everybody who's living in it is displaced, can't find a new place to live in the city, and is just sort of booted to the curb, has no choice in that process. And what we, particularly as a tenants union, want to make sure that people have is the right to negotiate their terms of leaving that property. We're not saying stop the development. We're not saying don't knock down these old rundown properties and build something new in its place. We're saying that when that's going to displace somebody, those people, like, everybody's needs in that situation are different. And that's why we can't just have like a single dollar amount, for example, that people have to be given in that situation, because some people a cash for keys offer is what they need, and that amount's going to differ depending on the person, the family size, etc. For some people, guaranteed alternative housing that meets their requirements is going to be needed. If somebody has a disability and can't go live out on the hills on the edge of Ithaca or something.
Thanks, Genevieve. That is 3 minutes.
Yeah.
After Genevieve is Katie Sims.
Hello, I'm Katie Sims. I live on State Street in the city of Ithaca. I am also here to talk about Right to Renew and about the need for it to be, like, I think, well, let's see, am I gonna get the words right? These words are so complicated. Approved for circulation, or whatever the thing is that lets it like be discussed and lets it come up for like real public comment next time around. Because as we've seen with the eviction moratorium being rescinded last week by the Supreme Court, or struck down, overturned, whatever, the like tenants' rights are in like such a tenuous position that that laws like these are urgent to get passed. And so we can see like a law that was great. It protected tenants from like being kicked out of their houses during a pandemic in a really effective way. And it's just like struck out, like the rug pulled out so immediately. And that's why all like something that's set in stone and something that is like happening quickly is necessary, especially considering all of the like rush of evictions that are going to come up over the next couple of weeks and months. Let me think. I don't have very much time, I guess. I will just second all of what Genevieve said on getting rid of the like right to break a lease indiscriminately for whatever reason they may be feeling, and giving tenants a negotiating power in that situation. It is tenants have like an attachment to their home that is like I would say far more powerful than
You have 1 minute left.
I'm actually going to go back on that. Tenants have an attachment to their home, and they should be allowed to stay in it, and landlords should have to like negotiate for whatever terms that there are to remove them if they would like to do something else, so that they can keep on living. The responsibility of being a landlord isn't just the responsibility of making passive income, and it should be really seen as like providing a house. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any response to the committee? Response from the committee? We are going to be speaking about good cause a little bit later in the evening, so I might save our comments for that point. Okay. Announcements, updates, any? No? Okay. Okay, so we have, before we get to good cause, we've got the landmarks ordinance revisions. Is Brian here?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm here tonight to talk about the work that the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission, as well as members of the town, a few members of the town have been working on over the last 8 months. You'll remember from earlier meetings in the year that the town wishes to establish a landmarks ordinance and wanted to work with the city to perhaps create a joint commission with shared staffing. And so the legislation that was sent to you and circulated this evening is what has come out of that working group. The biggest changes that are outlined in the memo are the structure of the commission. The commission will go from a 7-member commission to a 9-member commission. 2 of the commission members will be representatives for the city, and they will be appointed by the mayor with the approval of common council. 2 of the members will be residents of the town and appointed by the town supervisor with approval by the town board. And then the 5 remaining members will be at-large members that will be duly appointed by both the mayor and the town supervisor with approval from both legislative bodies. In addition to the qualifications that are currently in the landmarks ordinance, a few additional qualifications have been established for members to serve. They include a background in real estate transactions, law, and a few other that are outlined in the draft ordinance. The other really major change to the landmarks ordinance is the inclusion of 3 additional designation categories. The first being a thematic group. A thematic group is a group of resources similar to a historic district, but they're not geographically connected. So the example that has been used in our meetings are temple-fronted Greek revival houses. There are a handful, maybe 5 in the city limits, a few in the town. And so it's a very discrete category. Not all of those resources are located in the same place, and so it makes sense to nominate them together because they share a similar characteristic. But right now we don't have a mechanism to do that. If we wanted to do something similar with our existing legislation, we would have to individually nominate each historic resource that would fall within that theme. The theme would allow us to designate multiple properties that share a theme all at one time without separate nominations. The second new category is the interior landmarks category. This is something that other municipalities have, and it is primarily used for really important interior spaces that are customarily open to the public. The best local example would be the State Theater. It is an iconic historic interior that is recognizable by anyone that's ever visited it. This category could not be used for private residences. It must be for resources that are customarily open to the public and not private homes or private residences. The third category, which after last night's meeting, the language within the draft ordinance will get changed slightly, are scenic landscapes and natural resources. That is, the example that's used is, a farmstead. This is really speaking to the types of resources that may be in the town that are, indicative of the character of the town. There are examples from, within the city limits, but it's looking at broader context, more landscape features, how the land is used. That would be classified as a scenic landscape and now has its own category. So that is the basic structure. This evening I'm looking for your feedback. So in order for the town and the city to establish a joint commission and shared staffing, it's required that both the city and the town adopt identical landmarks ordinances with slight language changes to reflect different staffing positions within the city and the town, obviously. But from the certified local government, which is our partnership with the State Historic Preservation Office perspective, It's important to have identical ordinances so there's no confusion for applicants and residents, and also to make sure that the workings of the landmarks ordinances run smoothly, and that there aren't different rules for town residents and city residents. In terms of next steps, the plan this evening is to get feedback. Once that feedback is incorporated into the draft ordinance, it will be shared with the city attorney and the town attorney for their review and guidance. And then from there, it will be brought back to committee for a public hearing and hopefully adoption by common council. So are there any questions or initial feedback on the draft legislation?
Cynthia?
Hi, Brian. I don't know which way to look.
Cynthia.
This.
He can see you.
Okay, hi, Brian.
I could see you. And you can obviously see me. I'm very large. So.
So thank you for this. I really appreciate the changes that have been incorporated. I find the interior landmark component something that we talked about extensively in previous decisions, so I'm happy to see that included here. I am curious to better understand the significance of the scenic landmark and natural resources component, because that seems that it could be very restrictive in terms of what is perceived as an acceptable change in the future if, I don't know, I'm just going to throw something out. The city forester decides that weeping willow trees at Stewart Park are beautiful and it's iconic, but are problematic and might be better served by having different types of trees, and something like this would prohibit types of changes that a landowner or community might feel is an improvement or something that would better serve the interests of the individuals and even the community. So I find this aspect to be much more woolly in terms of how it might impact people in the future. So how would something like this work? And if somebody wanted to make a change to a property that has received this designation?
So if, to use Stewart Park as an example, I think the willows in Stewart Park and the landscape at Stewart Park is a great example of something that could be considered a scenic landscape. The proposed change would be, for example, the willow trees. It would be looking at the overall character of the property and how the removal of those willow trees would impact it. So it's not necessarily focused on the species of trees, but the feeling that those trees give along the waterfront. So, perhaps the willow, the emerald ash borer is a huge concern for the city and state now. If every ash tree in the city needed to be removed and a new tree was planted, that would be fine. It would be something similar for the willow trees in Stewart Park. It's not the specific tree that's being designated, it's the overall feel that's given. Really the focus here is preventing major changes that would significantly alter the spatial relationships within a given landscape. So the example that I have shared is, the view from the Stewart Avenue Bridge looking out over the lake. That would be dramatically changed if large wind turbines were installed on the waterfront. It's not something that is likely to happen, but that's the type of change that this ordinance would prevent, is these big dramatic changes that would significantly change important, natural features of our city. The other, we have gorges in our city that are incredibly beautiful, and they're a natural resource that has historic value. Ithaca Falls has been a tourist attraction since at least the 1860s, and there is, some evidence of that history the gorge. You know, if we were to designate it, we would look to protect the features that make an iconic site. And again, with a waterfall, it's hard to change a waterfall, but it's a recognition of that history and that value to the community, and also a way of providing another layer of protection to make sure it's not changed negatively. I hope that was helpful.
It is. It's a very new aspect, so I hadn't really thought about it in these terms before. Having a better understanding of how this plays out. Trying to envision, for example, you know, if somebody were to say, well, the view from the town of Ithaca coming down West Hill looking into the city, but, you know, a lot of that is zoned agricultural, or maybe that zoning might change, allowing future development. But then if there's a designation, then how does that overlay with changes that will come in the next 100 years and prohibit
Right.
those changes, or so.
Right, and it you know, there is the control valve there of the planning board review that's included with any proposed designation, both, you know, in the town and the city. The planning board would weigh in, and you know, they could comment and say, while there's no specific plan now for redevelopment of this site, there is in the next 20 years going to be a need for additional housing, and this may be an opportunity. The other piece there is making the argument that farmland, while beautiful, has significant or has significance or history. It was farmland. It's been farmland for 100 years, but you know, what makes it unique and what makes it representative of an important aspect of our history.
Thank you.
I'm fine with it. Did you have a comment?
No, I'll follow up with Brian later.
Okay. All right, thank you, Brian. I still don't know who to look at.
I know.
Right.
So just to be clear, Brian, we're going to run this by the attorneys, and we're going to get their take on it, and then at some point in the not-too-distant future, with their advice and help, we'll bring it back for another discussion with those changes, and then circulate.
Okay.
Right.
Yours.
Okay, before the public hearing, and then, okay.
Right.
And
The other piece too is once we have a final draft to share with the community, there will be public outreach in both the town and the city to hopefully answer questions, because this does represent legislative change in both the city and the town. The 3 additional designation categories may have some comments from the community, and it would be great to speak to as many people as we can before we adopt, or if we adopt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. Okay. Next up is, so we switched good cause, so we can talk about good cause now. And I guess I'll just start, and I'll say, I understand that there was a lot of questions about the PEDC's process and the distinction between circulating something and discussing something. And ultimately, that decision is up to me as the chair. And it's sometimes a judgment call, right? Are there times when we're dealing with new legislation that's particularly complex, legislation that is likely to be controversial? Sometimes I make the decision to put it down as a discussion, right? You can see that tonight. We're talking about community choice aggregation, which is a big deal for our climate change goals, and the landmarks ordinance, which you just heard about. A lot of times when we're approving something to circulate, it's a zoning change, it's a formal kind of requirement with zoning. But ultimately, both of these things are on the agenda, these 2 categories, because we want to have a place to discuss them and decide if we're moving forward with something and if we're green lighting something. And I understand that there are a lot of people that were very upset with my decision to put this down for discussion tonight. And my thought process in doing so, one is we're now down 2 members unexpectedly. I mean, we had Steve Smith resigned and Laura's out of town. The other part of my thought process was when I first looked at what Albany had passed, I looked at it and I thought, this is something I think we could work with as a starting point, something that we as a community could put out there. We had talked about this several years ago when it had come up with the state legislation. At that point, I had concerns about holdover tenancies and other issues related to the student market. A lot of those problems seem like they've been addressed in the Albany legislation. So I was pleasantly surprised to see it. The Ithaca Tenants Union's proposal that then came out was significantly different than what the Albany Common Council had passed. And that's, I think, normal in these discussions of this. I mean, if you look around the country, any city or state that has passed this type of law has done it in very different ways. There's a lot of different ways that we could proceed. But I felt that, and especially just talking to my colleagues, that given the distinction between those two things, the Albany legislation on the one hand and the Ithaca Tenants Union proposal on the other, that it was worth putting this up for discussion tonight. That said, I'm happy to take, a lot of people were asking for a vote on the ITU proposal. I'm happy to do that tonight with the understanding that if it does not pass, we are willing to move forward with something else and bring it back. There's also been discussion about right to counsel is something I know Laura Lewis is very interested in, which is a big problem, for tenants who are being evicted, who don't have access to legal representation. That's something that we also want to explore, and we are willing to bring that back next month and discuss that as well. So that said, I'll open it up for discussion, and then maybe we can take a vote. I don't know if do we want to kick off the discussion?
What would we be voting on exactly?
Well, so I think that the question is, are we willing to circulate the draft, the Ithaca Tenants Union's draft? My preference would be to, if we were to circulate anything, it would be to something that kind of looks like the Albany legislation, but is tweaked towards Ithaca and has, is amended so that it's actually mentions Ithaca.
Yeah, if we were to vote on anything to circulate, I would support sort of the same process that we were talking about with Brian, where there's a proposed legislation, we're going to have legal review, get the input of staff, get the input of specialists in the field, as well as the attorney's office, include components that we think we might want to have included in there, and then circulate that. Because if we included it later, then we would have to go and circulate it again. And it's easier to take things out, I think, than to add and then continue the circulation process, because we want to give everyone the opportunity to comment on it and not be surprised about what ends up ultimately going to council. So I don't feel that either legislation is in the condition of being ready to circulate for comment at this point.
So if we were to have a show of hands, who is in favor of circulating the ITU proposal tonight? That fails. Who would be in support of bringing back something maybe that looks like the Albany legislation next month for a vote to circulate? And we can also talk about the right to counsel at that point, at that time as well. Now, I did want to say, there's a couple things that, Genevieve had mentioned the concern that landlords are going to have about getting rid of a bad tenant. That actually is not the concern I have with this. And I just want to talk about, just throw out a few overall concerns I have, just as I've been thinking about this the last few days. One is that what I do worry about, and this is kind of thinking about unintended consequences, is are there going to be situations where there are landlords who, are they going to be much stricter in who they rent to? Because they're going to be worried about being stuck with a tenant for many years, and they want to make sure that it's a good tenant. So are they going to be stricter about who they're renting to, which means that they're potentially also want to upgrade properties and make them more expensive, which again is a concern for me, just because I think it would result in potentially result in a lack of lower income housing in the city. That's a concern. Another concern I have, I don't know how any of this impacts Airbnb and short-term rentals, and maybe it doesn't, but I still think that's a concern because I think this could potentially incentivize a lot of Airbnb being in the city. I mean, if I was a landlord and I was subject to this, and I would just say, I'm just going to Airbnb. I mean, if I can get a lot more money and there's like a continual stream of visitors and tourists who come here who are willing to pay a lot of money, that's a concern I have. The other concern, and I think this is something we have to think carefully about, is just how any of this, like all of this legislation is designed to protect long-term tenants. And it should, right? Those are the folks we're trying to protect. There's the student rental market is huge in this town, and every year we have these year leases. There's this massive transfer of all of these people into the community and then out of the community, and that's a delicate process by which that happens. That's not to say that we couldn't figure out a way to make this legislation accommodate that, but I want to be careful that we're not doing anything that's going to cause chaos for the thousands of students who are coming here every year and to go to school and are basically signing one-year leases, right? Those are just a few of the overall concerns I have. But again, I'm willing to bring this back next month, and I think we have a direction now. So I don't know if there's any other comments, Donna?
Yeah, I agree with your decision to put this on as a discussion item only. I think that was sound, given the conditions. I wish that we would be a lot more careful about using the same language for eviction as for not renewing leases. I think we're getting a little bit sloppy about that, and I think those are two different things. And I would be willing to consider something like the legislation passed by the city of Albany. But even that, I think, has significant problems. And Seth, I like the comments that you made. I think those are thoughtful and accurate, and those are things that would need to be addressed in any legislation.
Cynthia?
Yeah, thank you. To Donna's point about language, for me, ideally, I see this as the important component is giving tenants the option to renew, that they have a right to exercise an option to renew, which is in the Albany version, right? Which would still allow, as you mentioned, the student focus cycling in of tenants in and out, where they wouldn't exercise their option. But they have the option, maybe they're a graduate student, maybe they do want to stay. But if they were planning to move out, they wouldn't exercise that option, and it's still available to them. I think it's precisely because we have such a student-focused market that we have this anomalous situation here, which doesn't follow the logic of other communities where landlords are really working and screening to bring in quality tenants and keep them there. One of the experiences that I have on West Hill is the discovery, and this was back when I first came on council in 2012, was a series of violent incidents, which I discovered was a small group of tenants which had basically bebopped from one housing project to another on West Hill. And the discovery that landlords were not screening their tenants. They hadn't bothered to call the previous landlord to find out what kind of tenant this was. And then when they had this problematic tenant, they did not manage or reach out to that tenant to tell them that they'd observed these illegal activities, there are these inappropriate actions that were being taken, asking them to stop changing their behavior. The response of the landlord was, they're here, we're not going to do anything at the end of the year, we're not going to renew. So we ended up with badly managed properties, a trend of neglect, because of course this wasn't just one tenant, this was many tenants, and residents and neighbors feeling absolutely trapped because of the lack of active management, responsible management on behalf of the landlord. So if there is an onus on a landlord to be more selective, to actually do the screening, and it doesn't even have to require that this person have had a landlord previously, you're still reaching out to a family member or a reference. if you're checking on a reference and bringing in responsible tenants and engaging with them, giving them an opportunity to correct any behavior, being told, we see you, we see what's happening, this is not acceptable, we expect you to change, and having that documented, that level of interaction, it would make a world of improvement to many of the experiences of tenants that I've seen. So I think this is a wonderful improvement. I think there's a lot to address. I'd like to make, I think, looking at this in conjunction with the codes and laws that we already have on the books, how do they work together? How can we improve them? I think will be part of the process before we bring this back to circulate so that we can look at the entire picture. And I would like to learn more about your thoughts about with this push towards more Airbnbs and to see if there's something that we can finesse to protect against that, because obviously that's something that's an issue too.
Thanks. Any other discussion? Dexon?
Sorry, I missed the whole thing, but I'll just note that I know that there's a lot of discussion over or concern about various carve-outs and conditions for eviction, and I don't claim to have the answers, but I will note that since 1974, New Jersey's had what's called the Anti-Eviction Law, or Anti-Eviction Act, and it has fairly narrow carve-outs, you know, breaking the law, damaging the property, the owner wanting to move back into and use it as a primary residence. And then there's like I forget what the rent raise portion is, but there are relatively few carve-outs, or the number is high. It's like 18 or 17, but they're all in the same category. A lot of them could probably be collapsed into, you know, don't do illegal stuff or don't break the lease terms. So, and to my knowledge, as a 30-year resident of New Jersey, the rental market there is strong, and the things that we like to see, such as redevelopment, economic growth, still are pretty vibrant in this. I mean, it's a state without an identity. It's either part of Philly or part of New York, but nonetheless, it is a populated place with a lot of dynamism, and that continues to be true despite pretty decent tenant protections compared to what we have in New York. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing this move forward. I don't get to say on this committee, of course, but at the council level, I'm ready to advocate for it and guide us through whatever things make it uniquely applicable to Ithaca.
But Doug, that law in New Jersey, does that, you called it an anti-eviction law, does it also apply to not renewing somebody's lease at the end of a legally a mutually agreed upon contract with a determined end date? Or is it technically evictions that you're referring to? Those are two different things.
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know for sure.
I don't think anybody's arguing that we shouldn't have very strict laws against eviction in the middle of a contract.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yes, the New Jersey's law is about renewal.
I mean, these laws do exist. It's not unusual. I mean, there are a lot of cities and states that have them. And I mean, I think it's somewhat unusual for New York. You know, the state is debated for years enacting at the state level and hasn't done it yet. And, you know, Albany just passed it. But other than that, I don't think there really is. Maybe New York City. New York City has some interesting affordable housing laws, but for New York, it's new. But yeah, Cynthia.
One of the things that we had talked about was bringing this back in conjunction to the right to counsel. And also perhaps at that time, bringing in a specialist who could bring us up to speed on the changes to the New York State laws that were done in 2019 having to do with tenant rights. There are many aspects of that, I think, which is really important to consider and how it works together with what we are trying to achieve And seeking whoever that advisor would be will be something that I'm happy to help do and bring that presentation at the same time.
Okay. That's the HSTPA or where?
The HSTPA,
2019.
which I can't remember at the moment what it means. Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act, something like that.
Stability.
Stability, there we go.
Somebody from NICOM.
Yeah.
Yeah, NICOM or New York, or Law New York
Yeah.
might be a good advisor to that.
Okay.
Someone presented to the county legislature 2 years ago and gave a whole overview of HSTPA, so I can look up who that was and see if they might be
Yeah,
suitable.
if they're still available to come, that would be helpful, because my sense is that it's very poorly understood. And, just even conversations I've had recently, I think there's a lot of landlords who aren't in compliance with it.
Yeah, yes.
Both because they can't be in compliance with it, and because they're just ignorant of it, and they're just not following it.
And one thing that I would like to include in this effort is trying to address how local landlords are bypassing the code changes that we recently made in terms of the tenant protections that we enacted. Notice before the unit is put up for rent and so on. I have seen leases where there's nothing more than a line in the lease that says, I hereby waive my rights under code such and such in the Ithaca City Code. So how do we rewrite our code to make sure that something like that is not allowed to happen?
Okay. Thanks. So we'll bring that back next month with the right to counsel, and we'll move forward with it. Thank you. Community choice aggregation, is Luis here?
Yes, I see him.
Hi,
Hey,
everybody.
how's it going?
Well, I'm here just to tell you about community choice aggregation as an opportunity for the city to procure renewable energy on behalf of all residents, businesses, and anybody within the city's jurisdiction. Community choice aggregation is a new, relatively new type of legislation that allows municipalities, in representation of everybody in the city in this case, to procure power while still relying on the utility company for transmission, distribution, and in case of any problem with the delivery of electricity or natural gas. We've been talking for several months now with other municipalities here in Tompkins County about the possibility of doing it together, because as the name implies, the aggregation of potential customers allows for better negotiations with potential suppliers of electricity. And we believe that if we were to do this at the county level, we would have that bargaining power. However, recently it was decided that probably just a few municipalities, perhaps only the town of Ithaca and the city of Ithaca, will pursue this option. If we were to pursue this option, the city of Ithaca would be able to guarantee 100% renewable energy for everybody in the city as part of an opt-out program, which means immediately everybody would be enrolled in this program and everybody would be relying on renewable energy unless they decide to opt out of the program, which should be voluntary and in writing. In order to start this, we are in the process of engaging a consultant that will help us in understanding all the different legal steps that need to be followed. Among them is to prepare an implementation plan, a data protection plan, and present this to the Public Service Commission for approval. And once it's approved, then we would have 90 days for execution. We would need to select an administrator of the Community Choice Aggregation Program, which could be the municipality or a nonprofit organization or an entity that could be created between now and then. In order to enter that process, we would have to pass an ordinance basically allowing us to seek community choice aggregation on behalf of everybody. we are not ready at this point to present it. However, I wanted to bring this to your attention and ask if you have any questions at this point.
First of all, Luis, I don't think I've ever met you in person before. So it's nice to see you. I think I've only seen you over Zoom.
I think that's true for me too. Yeah.
Every year, so everybody's real, turns out.
Yeah, so thank you. Good to see you. Could you summarize two things? One is, what would the pricing differential be for our residents in terms of the impacts of this? Would they see higher costs or lower costs? And how much would that be? And how long would that continue for? And second is, what would be the administrative cost to the municipality who would take on the role of administrator of this program? How would we, if we were to work in conjunction with the town of Ithaca or other municipalities, how would those costs be managed, distributed among the different municipalities? Is it something that, I don't know, I'm making it as more complicated than it probably is, but does this become something that we add onto our water bill, for example, and then there's a fee that helps pay for whatever administrative costs we bear to manage these programs? How does that work in a nuts and bolts level?
Well, first of all, after reading all these about community choice aggregation, I can tell you there's nothing you can say or do that will make it more complicated.
Okay.
I think it already is. No, it is very well thought out. I think California was pioneering this concept, then eventually 7 states follow, and New York is one of them. Obviously, we're New York, so we have to be different, but not too different. I anticipate that the savings could be in the order of 20 to 30% compared to retail price of electricity today. So there are important savings to consider. I also believe that through a competitive process, we could actually get, we could negotiate a long-term price for electricity from renewable energy suppliers. And these contracts could be for 10, 15, 20 years if needed. That was the first part of the question. The second part is the administrator. The administrator is allowed to collect on the utility bill, added to the cost of the kilowatt hour, a specific amount that will cover the operational costs of the administrator. So it doesn't have to be the municipality. Actually, in Tompkins County, we are considering multiple options. One of them is Sustainable Tompkins, that could take on the role of administrator, and they could basically collect. And that would obviously reduce the amount of savings per kilowatt hour that we would expect. But given the implementation in other parts in New York, I believe that that 20 to 25% saving may translate to 15 to 20% savings. So at the end of the day, the savings remain, and it can be paid through the utility bill.
Follow up. So for example, I get billed by NYSEG, which of course is handling distribution and paying for my energy supplier. And so this would be something where I'm still paying my standard NYSEG bill, and then NYSEG pays to Sustainable Tompkins for both the electricity and administration fee. Is that how that works?
That's how it works, yeah.
So it would be seamless, presumably, for our residents and commercial businesses?
There would be a new element added to the bill where they will show separately what the cost of electricity is. The cost of distribution, transmission, and all relevant taxes will be probably the same, but the cost of electricity would be lower. And so that would be indicated in the bill, and who is the designated supplier of electricity. But other than that, nothing would change.
Thank you.
Donna?
So I often get requests from independent organizations to supply my clean electricity through NYSEG, and it's all very confusing, and I did that for a while and ended up paying a whole lot more than I used to. So under this plan, all those other people, all those would go away, and everybody in the city of Ithaca would get clean electricity through one source? Is that,
Yes, the city could, on behalf of everybody, could procure electricity from multiple sources.
oh, okay.
And the negotiations that we can have with them are independent, or you can have them all together, which means that you can have them compete with each other for the best possible price.
Mhm.
However, this is a voluntary program, so what that means is that if anybody wants to, go back to the old traditional system, they just have to say it in writing with 30 days notice, and then they'll go back to that, which means that people will still be sending you information and asking you to join their programs.
Oh, so this becomes yet one more choice to confuse us, right?
Yeah,
So-
but the
okay.
idea is to make it as simple as possible. If we were
Okay.
to pass an ordinance, we were to hold the public hearings,
Yes.
and everybody agrees that it's a good idea, then we move forward. It would be absolutely seamless to everybody. They will continue getting their bill. One day the bill will say, now you're part of CCA,
Yeah.
and you're paying less for electricity, and if you want to opt out, you need to write to this address. That's
Oh, so, but it's an opt-out.
an opt out.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Cynthia?
So that also exposes us to some level of risk that we may reach at some point a threshold where enough parcels opt out that it no longer becomes economically feasible, especially since there is so much confusion. We will still be receiving these mailers. A lot of people will have forgotten that being part of community choice aggregation was this great program that happened X number of years ago, that over time we may, pass that threshold where it doesn't make economic sense. And then what risk are we in terms of setting this up if that happens, or how do we protect against that, I guess?
Yeah, there is, the Public Service Commission actually asks you to implement a public outreach program that has to be permanent as long as the CCA is available. So you need to continuously explain to people why they are doing that, what is it that they're paying for. On the other hand, I believe, technically it is possible what you just described, but that's why through a competitive process, we actually can get companies to offer the lowest possible price for electricity and then sign a contract for probably 15 to 20 years with them. So that's, the duration of the CCA. And at the end of the term of the contract, it would have to be renegotiated, probably. So there is a possibility of what you said. I think it would be for us to make sure that people, remain conscious that they are part of this program and that this program is in benefit of everybody.
What's the timeline for adopting this resolution?
The process,
or the local law?
Actually, part of the reason why we decided to do it just a few municipalities was to streamline the process. So right now, I believe that we are less than 12 months away from presenting this to the Public Service Commission, which means we would have to pass the local ordinance probably within the next 3 months.
Okay.
But then the whole process, once we get approval and we get permission to start, I think it might take 18 to 24 months, probably.
So, because I was serving with Rod and a few other municipal leaders on this group that was looking at this, but I haven't been attending. I had to drop out because of work conflict. So you're saying now that it's only the town and the city that are moving forward? Because at that time when we were discussing it, there was Danby was involved, and I think Ulysses and a few others.
Yeah, I think some of them may be still interested in participating, but right now the recommendation from the city and now from the city and the town is that we just do it. The difference in doing it like this is if we do it together, just the town and the city, we can do this in 12 months.
Okay.
If we needed to do it with everybody else, it may take 3 years. So
okay.
And once a CCA is established, then you just sign an MOU with the other municipalities to add them to the CCA, mm-hmm. and then it's a much easier process. So that's the reason.
Okay, Doug.
Going off Donna's question, so I intentionally pay more for electricity because I go for a provider that's all renewable, and so do you expect that estimated 15 to 20% savings to still be true if we are actively seeking out 100% renewable sources?
Well, I think in your case, the savings would be greater. So you're asking if, given that the cost of renewable energy is probably higher, I believe that the reason they are, the reason you're getting that price is because of perhaps volume or just because they can. I honestly believe, I mean, the lowest prices of electricity in the world have been provided by solar, and we're talking about extremely, extremely low prices. So there is no reason why we should think that here would be different. I believe that we can get savings at least in the order of 20% at least.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Where are we now? Oh, the East Hill Historic District expansion. So, is Brian coming back? Can we just look there, maybe? No? Oh, we can. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Why don't we do that? So this is a voting item tonight, moving it to council. We circulated it last month. So I guess this would be to approve the designation. The options are approve, remind me again, approve, vote it down, or send it back to the ILPC. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Um,
All right. Are there any, I mean, we discussed it last month, but I'm happy to provide an overview this evening if that would be helpful, or just answer questions. What does the committee prefer?
I mean, personally, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of this, just having done that tour and I read through the documents, and I support it, but I don't know how others feel, and it is a little awkward because we need all three of us to vote it to send it on to council tonight. So I don't know if you support it or not, but I mean, maybe even if you have doubts, is it possible that maybe we could say we'll send this on tonight for the full council?
Keep looking at me.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just,
No, when it first came up in the ILPC, I mean, Brian can witness that I was a little hesitant, but we talked about it, and he gave me a good tour. He re-explained to me the accommodations and the assistance that's available to owners of designated properties. The properties that we looked at in the group were lovely, and I think it would be an asset to Ithaca to retain them. I have heard from a few people who are opposed to this, that they think it's too much of a restriction on property owners, and so there's, but on balance, I think it'd be a good thing.
I guess that would have been my question, is what outreach was done to the property owners that would be affected by it, and what was the response? I myself had not received any negative response, so I wasn't aware that there were concerns raised by affected individuals. Is it a preponderance of those who are affected?
So, in terms of outreach, I did quite a bit early on to notify the residents and property owners in the area that this was coming forward. I held, earlier in the year, I held a public information session and invited all of the property owners and residents to attend. And about, let's say 12 out of the 19 properties in the expanded area were represented at that meeting. There was a public hearing at the ILPC meeting where people were given the opportunity to speak. And between those meetings, as well as, it's been presented at the ILPC twice, once for discussion, once for public hearing and vote. So there were multiple opportunities for people to comment. At the public meeting, there were a lot of questions about what designation meant, and what are the opportunities, what are the restrictions going to be. At the public hearing and and in writing before the public hearing, we did receive a mix of comments on the proposal. There were two property owners that, one was strongly opposed to the designation. The other spoke, their opposition was not as strong. They felt more that it was, you know, they didn't want additional restrictions on their property. The property that was very opposed to it sent in written comments, and they're included in the agenda packet. But there's also a group of people within the area that are very supportive of the historic district and actually requested that this work be done. And they either reached out to me individually or submitted comments, which if they submitted written comments, they're included in the packet. So I would say the majority, there's a group of people that are very excited about this and would like to see it move forward. There's a group of people that are opposed, and then there's, you know, the majority of the people have not commented either for or against the proposal.
Pretty standard. Okay. All right, thank you.
So is there a motion? Oh, were you gonna say something?
Oh, I was just gonna, and forgive me if you said this already, but you have had a public hearing for this at the ILPC meeting, Brian, is that correct?
I can't hear anything. I've lost audio.
You've had a public hearing for this, is that correct?
Yes, we held a public hearing in June at the ILPC meeting.
Okay. So is there approval? Oh, Duck, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that as the other second ward representative, I'm fully supportive of this and appreciate Brian giving me and Steph a really nice tour of the affected properties.
Cool. So is there a motion to approve? Moved, is there a second? Seconded? All in favor? Sending that on to council, and that carries unanimously. Thanks, Brian.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Court Street rezoning, which is somewhat related, right? Is that, yes.
Oh, and there's Megan.
There's Megan, okay.
Hi. I apologize if my assistant comes in. She's really excited that we're allowed to participate remotely again.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share a little bit of the information about this proposal. Over the past 6 to 8 months or so, we have been approached by several property owners that have wanted to make improvements to their building. Everything from accessibility upgrades to small expansions, other safety improvements that would have they felt were necessary for COVID, but they are considered non-conforming uses. So this requires a use variance in order then to do anything that could be considered an expansion of the non-conforming use. These uses have existed for decades at this point. When the R3 zone was originally established, it used to allow professional offices as a right. That in the 80s was amended to allow medical and dental offices. So these have been in continued practice, maybe not necessarily the same owner, but the same category of use since that time. So we were trying to look for a way that would not alter the character of the neighborhood, but would eliminate the need for a use variance for every small change that these property owners wanted to make. Now, this doesn't mean area variances, but it does mean that use variances, which are more challenging, particularly in this case. So, after reviewing the number of properties that are non-conforming uses, as well as some information about the current properties, things about setbacks, lot coverage, height, and the uses that are existing, it appears that the B1A zone would be an appropriate fit for this area. It would allow mostly the same area requirements with a modest increase in lot coverage, and I say modest in this case. It is 15%, but many of these properties are already exceeding the 35% that's currently allowed. So again, this would be another area to bring a lot of those closer to conformance with our zoning. So we wanted to bring this proposal to you to get some feedback and see what your thoughts are, and if it's something you'd be interested in considering to seek approval to circulate.
I mean, I support it. I think it seems reasonable as a way to kind of reduce the need for these variances, and I think it's. Did you have a comment?
I do, but finish.
Oh, that was basically it.
Oh.
I support it.
Megan, I might be confusing this one with some of the others that you're going to discuss also. Yes, I am. The next one, which one of your recommendations, well, you can answer the question anyway. So a few of these properties are used as, for commercial, have commercial uses, even though they're zoned residential. And so we want to change that, but then they could still have residential uses in addition to the commercial uses, is that right?
That's correct. And a lot of these uses might have like a medical office on the first floor, but then have an apartment above or somewhere else in the building. And it would certainly still allow single, 2, and multifamily dwellings in this area with the change.
Cynthia?
And perhaps when this comes back, it'll be clearer. So could you articulate, are you proposing just changing the zoning on a parcel by parcel basis, or are you looking to change the zoning on, everything on the north side of Court? I'm a bit confused as to what exactly we're rezoning.
Sure.
It seems like it's parcel by parcel, except for one particular block, which I'm not quite sure I know which block that is.
So in the packet on page 56 is a map, and that would be, we are looking at changing all of the zoning along the north side, what's R3A, that starts just past Geneva Street, all the way up to Lynn Street on the north side.
Got it. Duxon, help me. I was looking at the wrong map. So I see that.
That's
now.
okay.
Okay. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Very clear now that I'm looking at the right thing. I see that, so we are not looking at doing anything for the parcel on Terrace and Court, that non-conforming use that's sort of hanging out all by itself. We're going to leave that one as is, correct?
Oh,
This little lonely one right here.
is it on the southern side
Yes.
of the street? So that is a surface parking lot, or is categorized as a surface parking lot right now. And we did not include that at this point in time. Again, we were looking more to allow the buildings that have kind of established rights to uses like the office uses, not necessarily to find a way to make the surface parking lot an allowed use.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Doug?
I'm supportive. Yeah, it's already a small business corridor, so I think it makes sense.
All right, is there a motion to circulate? Moved by Cynthia, second by Donna. All in favor? And that carries. And what do we have next? The change in grade plan definition. So there's another memo on this one, and seems like it's pretty self-explanatory, the memo you wrote. Are there any questions on this?
I do.
Yeah, Cynthia?
So functionally, because of the change in distance between 10 feet and 6 feet, do you think that will have a meaningful impact?
It really depends on the site, and it varies based on the topography of the site, whether it would, help or hurt. It goes both ways, to say, in some cases, it would make a building taller, and in other cases, it would make a building shorter under zoning. It's really, it depends on where the grade is on the site, to be honest. If it's right up next to the building, it won't have a big difference. If it's further out, it could have a difference on the overall height of the building. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so in College Town where you have a steep slope,
Right.
it would result in things being taller? I'm trying to triangulate this in my head. How will it affect, especially ones on a steep slope, which is, I think, where this becomes the most relative?
It's always the most problematic too. how to
Right.
Interpret that.
Yeah. Again, it will vary site by site, and where the slope is. So you're right, in some cases, that 4 feet difference in where the measurement is being taken could allow a few extra feet in building height. And then there's other sites where it's going to allow a few less. But the biggest benefit that we see is that it makes it consistent between building code and zoning. Right now, when a project comes forward, there's 2 building heights on slope sites. There's the building code height and the zoning code height. So this will just make it a lot more consistent and clear, so we don't have to run into this constant confusion. And again, on a flat site or even more gently sloped sites, it won't make a difference at all.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? We don't need to do like lead agency for this or anything, do we? No.
This is just a circulation.
This is,
Oh, circulate, right, right.
circulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, is there a motion to circulate? Moved by Donna, second by Cynthia. Seems to be the combo this evening.
The only one we got.
Right. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Next one is, this is the proposed amendments to multiple dwellings and related parking requirements. So again, another memo. Are there any questions about this one?
Okay, it's C, there's a typo, has a hanging. Cliff
Yeah, oh,
Street
sorry, yeah, the
Retreat.
Cliff Street retreat should be on the other,
That's next.
or it should be D. So it's aligned building and housing code with definition of multifamily housing in the zoning code. What's your question?
So my question is, there's a line in here about if a unit in a duplex is over-occupied, then you just call it a multifamily. I don't think that's worded right, because in a duplex, there's occupancy limits in both. I wish I could find the line here, I'm sorry. Because I don't think that's... Oh, if these occupancy limits are exceeded, the building becomes reclassified as a multiple dwelling. I don't think that's what we want to say, is it? Because if there's 2, what am I misunderstanding here?
So, the R1, CR1, R2, and CR2 districts put an occupancy limit on the number of occupants in both single and 2-family dwellings. And then in the CR1 and R1, single-family uses are allowed. And then when you get to the R2 and CR2, it's single and 2-family. So if any property exceeds the occupancy limit that's set out and included here, it becomes a multiple dwelling, which is not allowed in those zones. So, and that's not a change. That's how it has been. It's the real area where we wanted to correct it here was that piece where it's implying the occupancy limit on an R3. So because again, multiple dwellings are permitted in the R3. So when you limit it the occupants in the duplex, it just becomes classified as a multiple dwelling in an R3, which is allowed. It's really cleaning up, I guess I would say, a conflicting section of the code.
I still don't understand, but I don't want to belabor this, and it's just to circulate, so I'll get in touch with you offline.
Okay.
The aspect of this that triggers for me is, I believe under, for example, if you're gonna run an Airbnb, right, that then starts to exceed the occupancy limits of a 1 and 2 family home, and that's one of the reasons why running an Airbnb is only allowed in a multiple dwelling zone, which would be R3, which again would be consistent with this change. So I thought, just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was an interesting nuance in the original code that this again reaffirms.
Okay, so we're ready to circulate?
Yeah.
Is there a motion? Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Donna. All in favor? And that carries unanimously. Next is the Cliff Street Retreat.
Did you,
Oh, sorry. What was that?
was it okay? So that was the 2-family dwelling one, and then there was the multiple family. I think they might have gotten mixed up.
Oh. Oh, is there another ordinance?
There is one more.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was bringing you all a lot this month.
Oh, yeah, okay. Should we just go ahead and circulate that too? I mean, or could we circulate both with that vote? Are we comfortable with that?
They're two separate ordinances.
Okay. So the next one would be the multiple dwellings,
Yes.
because that was the 2-family dwellings, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So discussion on the multiple dwellings? Duxon?
I think this is fine for consistency's sake, but I would like to note for the record that I would like to see all minimum parking requirements eliminated someday. I would like to see all minimum parking requirements in the city eliminated someday. But this consistency is, it's fine, it makes sense.
Yes.
Just to note that, for the record, I like minimum parking requirements having to do with dwelling size. So could you explain to me we're talking about the ordinance that includes under the definition of a multiple residence, the definition of a rooming house, boarding house, cooperative household, fraternity. So why was it not there before, and what raised it to add this now?
Okay. So rooming houses, boarding houses, the townhouse garden apartments, they are all considered multiple dwellings, and have been. And they have their own definition and are listed as a separate use in the chart. Now they're all allowed in the same locations, but they're just listed separately. The issue has become that some of them they're all multiple dwellings, but some of them have less stringent parking requirements than others. And with the debate over whether there should be minimums aside or not, it becomes an issue with someone saying like, oh no, this is a rooming house, so I only have to provide, 6 spaces, where if it was an apartment building, they would have to provide 8 or 9. So it kind of, the distinction then is not clear, when in reality, they are all multiple dwellings, and it kind of just becomes this shell game of which use is most beneficial to them to be classified. So for the sake, again, for more being consistent, and not encouraging, using parking requirements to drive the type of housing that is constructed, we'd like to have everything be considered a multiple dwelling. Of course, there's different subcategories, and they're all still allowed, but they will all have the same parking requirement.
So if you had a row house whereby the row house was on its own parcel and could be individually owned, Is that a multiple dwelling or a single family?
So, you're looking at the zone, the number of occupants there, how the parcel, how many row houses are on a parcel. So all those things, it depend on whether it's considered a single family home, two family, or multifamily. But to your point, say you had 5 row houses on a lot, and they were each individually owned, however that structure is set up, they are considered a multiple dwelling.
Right, but if you had 5 row houses on 5 each row house is on its own lot, then that's a single family. Okay, got it. It can be, we can do both, I just want to make sure, can we do both?
Yes,
We can, right? Okay. Thank you.
yes, yep.
So I'm curious about what a garden apartment is versus a regular apartment.
There is a definition for it, and I can pull it up. At this time, I'm not really sure that we need all of these separate definitions either. But again, the purpose of this wasn't to really change like what was allowed. It was more to kind of close what's become a bit of a loophole. But that is a great question as to whether we really need separate definitions of garden apartment versus townhouse versus row house, because we have separate for each of those.
And we could lump them together, I guess.
Yeah,
I look at the definitions, but.
Absolutely, and I mean, it is something we can dig deeper into if we don't want to keep them called out as separate, but basically right now, they're all multiple dwellings, so I'm not really sure, there isn't necessarily a benefit to having a separate definition for garden apartment living, I believe is what it is, so.
We okay with that?
Yeah.
Motion?
Oh.
Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Donna. All in favor of circulating? And that carries unanimously. Now we get to the Cliff Street retreat.
Now I'm curious. So since we're so far ahead.
We are quite far ahead, aren't we?
The consultant who's gonna present isn't here.
Okay.
I mean, I think it would be better if they presented their zoning possibly.
Okay.
So we could move on to the next item.
Okay. West Hill Planned Unit Development Expansion.
Yes.
So, and this is the boundary of the PUDOD. We're considering moving it to include these 2 parcels because it makes sense for redevelopment. I mean, I'm not hugely familiar with this part of town, so I defer to Cynthia. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
I gotta admit.
I love it. I love it. Let's practice this. Yeah, this is a very interesting block. This block is bounded by Elm Street and Hector Street and of course Chestnut. And we have these 3 very large parcels. Obviously we have the armory there that there's a lot of interest in and what the future of that would be. And being that I do believe that municipalities have basically the right of first refusal, right, in the sale of that parcel of claiming it for some government use.
Mhm.
And I've heard a lot of different ideas bandied around. I think the element of this that I'm thinking about is it is a very established, R1, R2 neighborhood. And I know that it has been discussed that the PUDOD is an opportunity to exceed the surrounding zoning in order to achieve other things, whether or not it's height or density and so on. And so I do have a bit of hesitation with regards to that. But I also recognize that it is very close to a school, very close to downtown. It's very easily accessible. It doesn't have a lot of the other constraints that elsewhere on West Hill has because of its immediate proximity to the inlet. It's a really unique opportunity to do something different. So I'm definitely in support with circulating this as a discussion, but it comes as no surprise that of course I'm always thinking of scale and wanting to have something that is supportive and enhances the neighborhood rather than overwhelms it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're comfortable circulating? Is there a motion? Moved by Donna, seconded by Cynthia, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. So the person who's presenting, are they like, I didn't realize how far ahead we are. We actually are really far ahead.
An hour and a half.
Yeah. Are they coming at like, okay, all right. Can you remind me of the process with this too? Like, I thought we already approved this. No, we approved the approval and concept.
You approved it in concept, which meant that they were then directed to file a site plan review application, go through seeker, and develop their zoning.
Right.
So they have been doing that. They filed a site plan review, and there is a schedule on the update. They filed the site plan review application. The planning board has been looking at it for a while. We are well into the seeker part of it, but zoning is part of seeker. So before the planning board concludes the seeker process, we have to make sure that the zoning has been more or less approved by planning committee and council. So this is the time when we would present the zoning to you to get feedback on it, and so by the time we're ready for seeker, the zoning will be, you would recommend the zoning to council. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And then they would do the seeker, and then they'd have to go, then the process is, then they have to get final approval for one phase of the project. This project only has one phase, and then it goes back for the actual approval of the PUD to Common Council. So it's a really relatively straightforward proposal. It's not complex like some of the other PUDs you've seen. So if you're comfortable after they present it with the zoning, I think it would be appropriate to circulate it if you're comfortable.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a big change from existing zoning, right? Is it?
It is not a huge change. In fact, they have, if you look at their proposal, which is in your packet, what they've basically done, they've provided a use table
Yeah.
and an area table. So what they've basically done is taken all the uses that are already allowed in the R3 and included those, and they've taken out some of the ones that they don't think they'll ever want, like a hospital, for instance, and a mortuary. And then they've added in uses that are allowed in B2, but all of those by special permit. So those would be the uses they would be proposing. So everything that's already allowed in R3, and then by special permit, some additional uses allowed in B2. And if you remember special permit, it's another process. A planning board approves special permits, and you do an environmental review. So any use would be looked at for environmental impacts. So if it were a higher traffic use, for instance, or something that created noise, there would be it's allowed by right, but it has to undergo another separate approval process that includes an environmental review.
Honestly, I think this is pretty straightforward.
And then the area requirements are on the other side of the area table. There's what's proposed, there's what's current, and there's what's existing. And basically what they're proposing is to allow the main thing is that if you look at the site plan, we should also have a photo. The building is right up very close to the property line. It doesn't conform with current zoning, and they don't want to make that setback. They want to be able to keep that setback, but they don't want to have that same setback for the whole property. So what they're saying is for the existing building, it's allowed to stay as it is, but for new buildings, they would have a setback of, 10 feet.
Right.
And keep the rear yard setback. Otherwise, it's really very, very similar than the existing zoning.
So
I understand that there has been some concerns raised by neighboring residents one of the comments that perhaps I didn't understand the interpretation, but the comment has said that what this proposal is to create a 20,000 square foot commercial use. Can you speak to that? I understand that the proposal includes some, short-term rental, long-term rental, office space, conference room space, maker space, retail space. Is that actually a commercial use? And what is the traffic/environmental impact of that? So these were definitions. The commenter is a very well-regarded and experienced city planner. So I'm just wondering if there's something that I'm not seeing that he is trying to address.
Well, I guess I would like to
So,
invite,
You did a great job, Lisa. I'm gonna tell Craig it's fine.
But I will say that, every part of the proposal is, we're still doing environmental review, we've got a traffic report, so we're looking at that. But in terms of the definition of commercial, I think it comes from what the housing will be, right? So
Right.
what is your proposal?
So there are standard apartments in here, there are only 6. Then there are regular leased apartments, 1-year base leased apartments, and that represents probably just a little bit less than 25% of the building program. And then there is an existing office program, which in Kodama had, which is roughly 3,000 square feet, their office core, 2 floors. That hasn't changed, and we probably aren't changing any, except for some partitioning based on the need of a new tenant. That hasn't changed. We have roughly 6 or 7 pods of small retail spaces on the west side of the building. These are micro retails, less than 800 square feet.
That's great.
And so they're in there. And I think you guys have the program footprint of the building, which shows that. And then there are some what we call short-term or extended stay spaces that are anywhere from a month to 12-month. They're basically short-term apartments.
And how many of those?
There's 6.
So 6 long-term, 1-year leases.
Regular apartments and 6
With-
hybrids.
With full kitchens and,
Yep.
and everything, and then.
All 12 have full kitchens.
Okay.
Here's the-
And that does not include the 2 additional,
The 2
Cottages.
cottages to the north are our buffer to the neighbor. Craig, please. Craig and I have addressed and met with the immediate neighbors. We met with the neighbor to the north.
you'll need to speak directly into the microphone.
We met with the neighbor to the north, and we had engaged, and we told them we were gonna create a buffer of more traditional living units between us and the existing building structure. And these are 2 small cottage houses.
Short-term or long-term?
They
rental?
will be 1-year based leases.
With an option to renew, hopefully.
We always hope so. And there's a very tight property line with our house to the north, so both residents who are to our south, immediate to our north and south, are pleased with this program. They were concerned that when they heard it was going up for redevelopment, it might be not in harmony with their purchase. They were scared. They just bought, these are both first-time home buyers, and when they saw this, they were very pleased that their asset was going to be protected. It was not going to be a 160 apartment, 5-story building. They liked this.
I did have a question about there's a special permit for the maker space, kind of light manufacturing. I was wondering what the rationale was behind that, because I thought that was like part of the original proposal, is you wanted to have some maker space in there,
It was
right?
actually in reaction to George McConigal, who, and it kind of surprised me, but it makes sense, is we're losing manufacturing jobs that are based in the city of Ithaca. We didn't lose them because Kodama didn't like the site. We lost them because Encodema was expanding. And this site couldn't expand Encodema. And we worked very hard to keep Encodema in Tompkins County, which we did. But George said, you know, this is an important thing to keep jobs in Ithaca. So there was a comment about keeping makerspace or light, and I'm not saying we're gonna be making industrial widgets anymore, but the opportunity for a startup company that's making a small product, we thought a makerspace was very appropriate.
Yeah, so I agree with the makerspace. I was asking, why are you requiring a special permit for it?
We're putting it under special permit just for certain things that we thought could do with a little bit more looking into what it was, you know, review and what was involved in it.
Mhm.
And a makerspace being one of the louder of the, potentially
Right. Okay.
louder of the, or more disruptive, we thought it was appropriate there. I mean, there are already special permits for some of the uses that were allowed under R3 anyway. It's just additional review is all basically.
Is that like, would that be the responsibility of the startup or the business that was starting there, or would that be the property owner's responsibility? Like if you got a tenant that had some, I don't know, industrial something, I don't know what it would be, but would you then have to go through the special permit process and,
Yeah.
or is it, okay.
An example of that might be is when Encodema was there, they had some pretty high velocity ventilation.
Mhm.
That high velocity ventilation was heard in the neighborhood. We are going
Right.
to shy away from ever duplicating that again, just out of respect for the improvement. It's one of the improvements we're citing is those types of things. Large dumpsters and tractor trailers are going away. So we were concerned that an exhaust system of some sort or something mitigating manufacturing noise might be going in the wrong direction. So that's why the special permit.
Okay. I think this is a great project overall. I think it's really cool. So yeah, so I'm glad to support it. And it really doesn't seem like there's a huge deviation from the zoning, so.
There isn't really, and I apologize for being late.
We apologize for being very efficient with our time.
Kudos to you. One thing I just want to point out in the last few days, so we do have the rear yard at 20 feet. And because we are looking at moving the cottages further away from the neighbor, and we would like to space them apart a little bit more, we were wondering if we could change the rear yard to a 15-foot rear yard, just so we can space them apart a little bit more. We're a little restricted on the street side because of existing mature trees and some bushes, which are a great buffer. And so to stay away from those and yet give it more space for both cottages to have a little more wiggle room, we were interested in potentially making that 15 feet. We've just been reworking that in the last few days, and so that would be the only change
Okay.
that I.
So, let me see, so that would mean that.
Right there, yeah.
So
Yeah.
this right here is where your rear yard would be here,
Yes,
and so,
and it's to the property line. The property line kind of bumps in from where it is behind the building, and that's where we're sort of tight. And so that was our only thought. I mean, we can make 20 feet work. We were just hoping for a little bit more wiggle room on this
And
cottage.
that is a non-buildable embankment.
that,
It
there
is
isn't
very
any,
Yeah.
there
steep.
isn't
Yeah.
anything, any development in the back on
No.
that, that's a slope. that
Not
goes
along the slope.
Well,
So-
oh, sorry.
Sorry, so rear yard is what you're facing the bottom of the bank. That's your rear yard, and the side yard is the 20 feet, and the front yard is the 15.
Yep.
Okay. Have you considered putting one like a single family home that might support a family or are you looking at 2 one-bedrooms? I mean, this is a really great opportunity for families with children with, open space or things like that, but it seems that everything that you're installing is either a studio or one bedroom, is that correct?
That is true in the existing building. The 2 cottages are 2-bedroom.
Okay, they are 2 bedrooms.
And just as part of our zoning, so the deviation from the R3 with the 4,000 square foot lot minimum. Some of that is looking to the future with flexibility of actually potentially being able to break off those two cottages, either into two different lots or two primary residents on a single lot. And that would allow us to do it. We're not planning on doing that right now, but like Ling said, they are 2 bedrooms and they're nice and small and potentially affordable if they were to be made for sale in the future. And so some of the zoning, that one zoning change was sort of with that in mind.
Of allowing that option at
Of having
some
that option, yeah.
future time. Are there other elements to this that will support families, like any kind of equipment or features that might be beneficial for younger people?
Well, we think that the access to the hopefully to the children's garden, to the waterfront trail, to the Black Diamond Trail, it has some real connectivity to parklands.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to tell what the retail tendencies are gonna be, but it would be nice to have them, to really focus on something that's beneficial for the neighborhood. You know, things that people need on a regular basis, whether it be a cafe or whatever.
One thing also that they're proposing that isn't part of the, PUD specifically, but it's been part of, well, it could be actually, is the 2 Tcat bus stops.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, we did meet with Tcat and talked about potential bus stops in that area. You can sort of see the crosswalk across the street there. I think we're shifting that slightly to the south based on feedback from them. But they were all on board and they were hoping, in the years in past, apparently they were hoping to set up a permanent, semi-permanent stop further up the road, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. And so they thought this was a good opportunity as well. And if we can, we might be able to actually put an enclosure in on the far side of the road as well.
If maybe Lisa, this is a question for you. Given the recent fatality on Cliff Street, young woman getting off the bus at night, killed crossing the road, is this something that we could install a flashing light? So if someone is getting off the bus, the visibility is very, very difficult on Cliff. It's quite dark. Cars are going fast and they don't imagine pedestrians at all.
Yep. And so the suggestion from one of the TCAT guys was partly we're going to move it more south so there is better visibility from that slight curve in the road, but also a pedestrian activated flashing light for the crosswalk from both sides of the street. And we thought that was a great idea.
I would love that.
Yeah.
and the transportation engineering also suggested that because that's a little bit, the visibility is low and the speeds are higher, so.
Yeah.
Right, and we had the intention of maybe a flashing light, but the TGAP guys, his point was that if it's going all the time, it kind of becomes background, and so you don't pay attention to it anymore. And if it's pedestrian activated, then it's only on at certain times, and it's more of a trigger for people to, oh, what's going on here, and start slowing down. I thought that was great.
Yeah, the one at the tuning fork, I think, is incredibly effective. So that would be great.
Joanne?
I had 2 questions. Is Cliff Street a state route?
I think it
It
is.
is a state route, but
So-
it's apparently city jurisdiction.
Okay, so we don't have to go through DOT to get the pedestrian signal?
Good.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because I definitely agree that we need that signal on Cliff Street. It may also act as a deterrent, because once people get past the light, they just tend to shoot up Cliff Street. So that's probably good. And then the other question I had is about the cottages. So they will have separate utilities, and so they can be subdivided at some point in the future. Okay, great. Your question, Cynthia.
Yes.
I've learned.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, we ready to circulate?
Yes.
Motion moved by Donna, seconded by Cynthia. All in favor, and that carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You can slow down now.
Yeah. And the minutes? Do we have minutes?
minutes.
Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Cynthia, second by Donna. Yay.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It went a lot faster than I thought. I was anticipating, based on the week I've had, I was anticipating a lot of public comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought that your reasoning was very good and absolutely the way we do things.
Entirely consistent, and I feel like we even talked about it at the end of the previous PEDC meeting, or.
We might have, or the council meeting.
Somebody asked why it wasn't on the agenda.
Right.
Last time.
I'm trying to convey that things take
Right.
multiple discussions. Don't be lucky if it's just one discussion.
Yeah, especially for such a complicated, issue, also in a community where there's so many rentals. I mean,
Right, and it's, very, very broad scope.
No, and the landlords now are starting to call, so.
Yeah, I was wondering when that was gonna start.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just fun.